hello everyone. Really great to be with you today. So as Mark said, today I'm going to talk to you about 5 of the lessons that I've learned over the last 9.5 years or so of working in digital transformation. I've just been blown away by the quality of the panelists that we've had here today. And again, I want to pass on my thanks as well to all of the great sort of lessons and knowledge and expertise that has been given out today by all of our panelists and attendees. Before we start, I just want to quickly tell you a little bit more about me. So I'm a partner at Digitopia. I have spent the best part of a decade at BCG and EY, working mostly on digital strategy and transformation. And I've focused almost entirely exclusively during that time on the media and entertainment sector. So you'll get a little bit of a different flavor to me than some of the other industries that we've heard from today already. What I will also add as well is, having worked with over 50 of sort of the leading Fortune 500 companies in this space, I hopefully will tell you some things that you haven't heard before today, but there is also a lot of overlap between sectors around the types of things that we need to tackle in order to transform in a sustainable and effective way in the long run. I most recently was at the Financial Times, and that was building a proprietary digital strategy methodology and a toolkit that is now being sold to customers. So for those of you who don't know, Financial Times has its own consultancy now, and it feels like everyone is moving in that direction at the moment. And finally, my focus really with Digitopia is going to be on growing the media and entertainment practice. And again, if any of you are from that sector here today, would love to take your questions, but also hear some of your insights as well at the end of this conversation. So I just want to start by sort of highlighting high level what my 5 lessons really for ensuring a successful transformation have been. And again, some of this you might think is duplicative, but hopefully I can add a little bit of color and flavor where possible to sort of bring some of these examples to life. But I'll start with at the top of the slide. So the absolutely critical thing for me at the start is developing an aligned and clear vision. I think we heard from one of the panelists a moment ago saying, there's no point starting on a journey or getting on a plane if you don't know where you're going. And I think it's absolutely critical that not only is the vision clear, but also everyone in your organization is behind that vision around what you want to achieve from this digital transformation journey. The second thing that I think is absolutely critical is having a strong governance model. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't have a way to implement it and have a really rigorous way of measuring how successful you've been at implementing said vision, then you'll never know whether or not you've actually made it to your destination, and you'll more than likely fail. I think another key part of what I've seen successful digital transformations over the years have been is customer obsessed. What I mean by that is putting the customer at every single decision and every single fork in the road that you have to make a big call. Try to put yourself in the shoes of the customer, and I'll come back to that in a moment. The fourth one is around kind of being prepared for gradual gains as well as setbacks. Again, you can spend a lot of money on an expensive consultancy, and there is always going to be setbacks. There are going to be things that come along that you weren't expecting, but it's about how do you use a methodology to deal with those setbacks and overcome those challenges as you progress through your transformation journey. And finally, please remember that it's not just about technology. When we speak about digital transformation, many people just put the tech first, and it is obviously absolutely a critical component. But as you'll see shortly, there are lots and lots of other elements of that puzzle that need to be addressed in order to be successful. So just to kind of start off with the clear and aligned vision piece first, I've kind of built like a very high level 3-step program here, and I can illustrate it with a few examples of projects that I've worked on in the past. But I think when you're coming up with your vision for your digital transformation and strategy, the first thing you have to do is obviously come up with a really strong vision and define it very clearly. The critical thing here is to use data to really think about what can we achieve with the resources that we have, and what is the highest priority elements of the transformation that we have to get done. And then we have to think about how is that vision compelling to others. And that leads me into step 2, which is the agree step. It's important to engage a broad set of stakeholders across your organization when starting on this change. If it's led by one of the chief officers or one of the departments, again, you will be destined to fail. It's absolutely critical to have widespread buy-in from across the organization. I had one CEO say to me one time, I set the vision and people just have to follow it. And unsurprisingly, they had to change their tune pretty quickly when we were going through this process. And they were getting resistance from different departments around this change. And then finally, step 3 is all about empowerment. So it's really critical that every department owns their elements of the change. And there's different governance models that we'll get into in a minute that will help us be able to ensure that we drive that empowerment. People need to feel like they have ownership, but also responsibility to be part of the success. In terms of the strong governance model, again, I have three sort of critical things to bear in mind when you're coming up with your governance model. The first is try and be data informed, not data led. Again, data is a buzzword at the moment that everyone is obsessed with, and rightly so, especially in the media sector. The importance of first party data about your customers is as important as it's ever been. And with cookies disappearing in the next 12 months, it's only going to get even more important. And I understand why people are obsessed with data at the moment. However, data can sometimes cloud really the key steps and elements that you have to go through to get to your final destination. So I guess what I want to say here is it's an art and a science. Try and use data where you can, but don't let yourself be paralyzed by data, because sometimes you just have to make a decision based on talking to your network, talking to others in the organization who really have a feel for how things are working at the moment and how they can be improved in order to improve in the long run. The second, and I touched on this before, is building a framework for accountability. So you have to make sure that there's a structure where folks feel empowered, but also accountable for performing their tasks. Whether that's what we've used at the FT, for example, which is mission groups, where we've set up different digital missions, and we have a digital leader within each of those groups that works with BAU teams in order to drive change through the business, or whether there's a different model that you can use. One other thing I'd like to mention here as well is the idea of change agents. It's quite an interesting theory and something that you can read more about at Harvard Business School, but there's basically a theory that when you're going through a digital transformation journey, you should be focused on empowering those people who have the best networks within the organization, not necessarily are the most senior. And the idea behind that is those people are going to be sort of the most proponents for your change model. And I think someone was talking about that before in relation to mules and sheep, etc. But this is more looking internally around sort of those activators of change within your organization. And the third one is around tracking and managing performance. Again, you have to have a way to be able to collect data and see how close you are to meeting your goals. So there should be a regularly monitored process in order to be able to check progress against those goals, but also something that rewards innovation and experimentation. Again, that's something that I've seen in many transformations that I've done over the years. The companies that most embrace failure as part of their digital transformation and actually reward it in some cases. You run an experiment, you spend some money, it doesn't work. Those people, should be made to feel like they made an effort towards that transformation. And there's always things that you can learn from experiments where you fall down. So just bear that in mind, that the more you fail, the more you learn, and the more you can use that in order to be successful in the future. So the third element, as I was talking about before, is being customer obsessed. Really, the critical thing here is, and I'll illustrate this with an example. A lot of decisions are taken in digital transformation, and including at clients that I've worked with, based around the complexity of the tech stack or operational challenges and elements, etc. And for me, that feels like the cart leading the horse. You are doing everything in your business to satisfy your customer. That is the reason why that we all exist in the businesses that we run. And actually having them there in the room with you to understand what is it that they want to achieve as part of this transformation with you can be extremely effective. So I would suggest engaging with your customers at the beginning of the journey and helping them understand what it is that you're trying to do, and understand from them current pain points in the current model, and any ideas that they have for future success, I think is absolutely critical. The fourth area is around preparing for setbacks. And again, as I said before, it's very, very important that you don't expect this to be a very straight road to success. You will find areas where you waste time, resources, etc. Obviously, market forces as well can change during your digital transformation process. And I think being as agile and as innovative as you possibly can when those challenges arise, I think are absolutely critical to you being successful in the long run. Looking at a new challenge that comes along as an opportunity to adapt and innovate rather than something which is limiting your ability to do what you originally planned, I think is really, really important for you being successful in the long run. And then finally, just about technology, I just wanted to highlight some of the other areas that I think are absolutely critical to digital transformation beyond tech. The first is people. And again, I have some questions here for you all to think about regarding your own organizations, but how do you ensure that you prioritize the customer, so the people on the outside of your business? Do your current staff have the right skills? That's super critical, because again, you're not going to be able to be successful if you don't have the right skills. And there's models there that you can choose. Do you build a new capability within your organization? Do you buy a new capability, or do you rent one? There's different options that you can address those skills gaps within your organization. What is the culture of your organization? Working a lot in publishing, as I've done at the FT, I've seen a lot of different news organizations have struggled with a very archaic culture in their newsroom. These are not business people, they are not digitally savvy necessarily in all cases. And as a result of that, you need to plan your change around the culture that you have, not the other way around, because it's much harder to tackle a culture that's embedded in an organization rather than trying to work with what you have whilst also pushing forward the change. And then finally, do most people in your organization work together? Do you have a lot of teaming, sharing of knowledge, or do they work in silos? Again, I'd say the latter is probably the most common at the moment of what I see in various media organizations, but it's important that we begin to break down those walls between departments and get people talking to one another using methodologies like the missions and skills groups that we have at some organizations that I've worked with in the past. The second is around innovation. So the process of idea generation in your organization has to be something which is empowered by the leadership. You have to allow for many voices in the organization. It doesn't mean that it's decisions by democracy necessarily all of the times, but you will get some of the best ideas from some of the most junior people in your company. And it's about how do you think about how do you give everyone an equal voice within the organization to generate ideas. The second around encouraging failure as well as success. How do you do that at the moment in your organization? Do you encourage experimentation? Do you provide budgets for teams to go off and try things? Again, it doesn't have to be a huge amount of time and resources that get spent on these things. You can just run them as pilots. You can, test and iterate and learn. And for me, I think that's one of the most important things when you're going through digital transformation, to fail and fail quickly. And then finally, what lessons can you learn from the outside world? So looking at your competitors, looking at other industries. So again, when I work in the media sector, I often look at things like the tech industry to get inspiration around different ways of setting up the organization for success. And finally, academia as well. As long as it can be put into practice, you can get some of the best ideas of how you transform and how you can do that effectively by going down that route. The third area is operations. So think about how complex or difficult are your current processes to change. That could be something that will be more challenging for you as you go through this, particularly perhaps if you're a manufacturing business. Within the media sector specifically, I've worked with, for example, agencies which have very complex media planning and buying processes that have a lot of data, and it's also how they earn money on a daily basis. So it's very hard to switch them off, migrate them, do other things to them, innovate them, etc., without losing revenues. And I'm sure you can all relate to that in your own businesses. So think about what is going to be the most complex and difficult and trying to structure how you make changes to those processes in the most logical and the least disruptive way. The second thing around what makes your sector different or special, again, having worked for a lot of different media companies, they always think that their sector or their particular company is different. There's a lot more similarities than you could probably imagine between these companies. And I think it's important to really identify where you are actually unique, and even your sector that you operate in, how can you take a competitive advantage through transforming digitally in an agile way. And then finally, how are you kind of willing to use analytics to track and measure success? You don't have to have a hugely complex analytical process and rigor to be able to do this. Sometimes some of the best KPIs and OKRs are the really, really basic ones. So think through it at the beginning of your transformation, how you're going to measure that across your operational divisions. Then finally, under data, what is your data strategy? So what data do you want to collect? What are you going to use it for? Where are you going to house it? What are you going to kind of do to it once you have the data? How are you going to manipulate it, etc.? Do you have the right capabilities within your data team? Do you have the analytical skills that you need? Do you have the data warehousing that you need, etc.? Have you invested in the right tech? That's just something to think about before you start on the journey, because it's very hard to do that once you're halfway kind of down the road versus right at the beginning. And then finally, are you using data effectively? Again, I mentioned this at the very beginning of the talk. People are obsessed with data today, and rightly so, but actually it's ended up with us collecting a lot more data than we can use or know what to do with. So I think it's really, really important that we are sensible when we think about what data we collect, how we use it, and how we can ultimately become successful through doing so. So you've probably seen this today already, but again, I just wanted to stop at this area before I go to any questions and just talk you through the Digital Maturity Index model. You'll see that a lot of the things I've spoken about through my transformation journey has been around these 6 key areas. And I think what makes the Digital Maturity Index model so unique and so effective is that it really does take into account all of the critical areas that I've seen over 10 years of digital transformation journeys. The interesting one for me on this is Industry 4.0 under operations. That's something where I think that the tailoring of the specific transformation journey that you're on to the industry you're working in is absolutely critical for success. And that's something that I'm going to be working on over the next few weeks and months for media. So I'm really excited to begin that process. So that's everything from my presentation.